Welcome to the Data Democracy. Presented by renowned O'Reilly author Ole Olesen-Bagneux. Empowered by Xenia. Make your data accessible and discoverable by anyone, anywhere, at any time.
Hi everybody. You're listening to the Data Democracy podcast, and I'm your host, Ole Olesen-Bagneux, Chief Evangelist in Xenia and the author of the Enterprise Data Catalog, published by O'Reilly. In this podcast, we explore what a data democracy is. Today's guest is Katharine Jarmul. Katharine Jarmul, KJ, is Principal Data Scientist at ThoughtWorks, and she is also the author of Practical Data Privacy, published by O'Reilly. I wanted to talk to KJ about her book, her career, and what data privacy is in general. And the conversation was really mind-stimulating, as you will hear in a bit. Here are my takeaways from the conversation. First of all, as a data leader, you should know that privacy is not something you turn on or off. It's something that unfolds at a continuum. And that's the second takeaway. Don't let privacy be a blocker. Instead, think about it as you enable or disable features that enhance or decrease data privacy. And third, final takeaway for data leaders, hire data privacy engineers. You need them in order to build a robust and secure data infrastructure. Okay, some data democracy takeaways. First of all, the most important takeaway here is that people should have the right to control how their data is being used. That goes in society in general, but that also goes for companies, employees, and the way they use data harvested from society. I think one of the biggest takeaways here is the second one. KJ pointed out that this will not limit the analytical potential of the data, that you give the right to control the usage of it back to the users that have created this data. It will not limit the analytical potential. In fact, it will increase the analytical potential because the usage will become way more precise. And then finally, the third takeaway, data privacy people are really nice. So remember to include them when you build your data democracy. Don't exclude them, you need them. But more than that, they are also just very, very nice. And you can definitely hear that from my conversations with KJ. We had a lot of good laughs. So tune in and sit tight. Here it comes. Hi, KJ.
Hi, Ole.
And I'm happy to have you on. So for the guests, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your professional experience, your educational background, stuff like that?
Yeah, so I'm currently a principal data scientist here at ThoughtWorks, so we're a global consultancy, and I work on data machine learning things, but my focus for the past 6 years has been on data privacy and kind of like the related field of ethics, right, which we can discuss in machine learning, which means I've done a lot of work in deep learning because that's mainly what we do now. I've done a little bit of work in transformers, but I've mainly been focused on bringing privacy technologies and emerging privacy technologies into the machine learning space. I have a long background in NLP, so I was kind of doing natural language processing before I moved into privacy. And for that, I have some exciting thoughts about your book, because there's some pretty cool NLP concepts in here, and I think it's really exciting that you're kind of combining this idea of data discoverability with NLP and so forth. I think that has some exciting things. And where I started my career was in data journalism. So I worked at a large newspaper in the US called the Washington Post as essentially an investigative data journalist and as somebody helping build what at the time we called news applications, which is a lot of how do we present data to users so that when we have cool investigative stories, we can display it to them in a way that makes sense. And in school, I studied statistics, but by way of political science and economics. And so
what a background.
Some of what I did. I was really into math, but at the time people told me the only job I would ever get with math was being a math teacher. So that didn't sound so appealing. So, but I'm still a big math fan. So
that's very odd. I mean, mathematics is one of the most desired skills for so many disciplines out there. I can't believe you got that advice. I have never heard of anyone
Pretty
actually.
poor advice.
Pretty poor advice. I mean, who would come up with that
Don't
kind of
trust,
advice?
yeah, U.S.
Don't-
high school. It's not a
don't-
great, not a great.
Don't do any complicated stuff for your studies. Don't do that. I mean, it won't get you anywhere. Okay, that's pretty bad advice. But you obviously had a very impressive career and well, things you did in your work life. Anyway, that sounds super interesting with the Washington Post. So was that like the things you saw there? Was that what made you interested in privacy, or was that later on?
That was actually later on. So I think the Washington Post taught me a lot about NLP, which, by the way, so like I went to university during AI winter. There was no such thing as machine learning. I actually started as a computer scientist, and most of our first classes were building Java applets, and I basically wanted to kill myself. I was like, this is the worst thing ever. I'm never gonna. So it sucked the joy out of computers. Exactly. Like, how can you make computers awful? Build a Java applet. That's how you can make computers awful. My work at the Washington Post was around the first time I think people were really thinking of large scale document processing, and I got to participate in some of that. And also, kind of near and dear to your stuff, thinking through like user interfaces to explore data. And often we had a lot of text data, where we were a newspaper. And so I was privy to some of those conversations of entity recognition and tagging and so forth. And I think that was really cool to be a part of. And I think that sparked my interest to NLP. So after I left, I went on to help lead a team at USA Today building interactives, and I got to do more statistical work there. And then I eventually left and I worked with a startup that was focused on NLP. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So I mean, I'm thinking of all these massive leaks that newspapers have been coordinating globally
Yes.
for the last couple of decades, I think it is, or at least the last decade. So it's been very interesting to follow. For me, completely as an outsider, but you must have been right in the center of all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty exciting. Obviously, I don't know how well known the Washington Post is worldwide, but within the United States, it's one of the leading papers, particularly for political news in the US, which is also why I was very interested in joining the team there. And of course, brilliant journalists there, just really, especially the investigative side, but also even the local news side. I worked for the local news team for a while. I think journalism is extremely important and unfortunately a bit undervalued. And we could talk about the way that maybe also some of our field has contributed to that, and also the kind of the new situation with generative AI and the risk that it poses journalists, I think. But when you have had a chance to work in a newsroom, especially a leading newsroom, you see the amount of knowledge and effort and passion and investigation that goes into every single piece of content that's produced for the most part. And that is quite inspiring.
Yes. I completely agree. It's kind of a track we shouldn't go too much down by, because it's not really the topic of the podcast, but it's very, very interesting still. Like, I think certainly in journalism, we see both a lot of opportunities, but also something that broke a little bit with the rise of like modern tech. And how to fix that is super interesting and necessary.
Absolutely.
We should perhaps dedicate a couple of minutes later on in the conversation, but I really it's super interesting at least. But I still want to, like, when did this privacy, when did that got under your skin? I mean, what how did it occur in your, how did you like move towards it? It must have been something that you realized at some point that you wanted to move into that
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a few themes. There's probably maybe some of growing up. I was involved in various forms of activism. I grew up in Los Angeles, California, during a time of a lot of political change. I mean, maybe there's not never a time of not a lot of political change in the U.S., but during a time of a lot of political change, and I was involved in a variety of activism there, kind of helping try to fight for anti-racism, fight for equality amongst people, fight for better representation amongst people, and so on and so forth. And interestingly enough, like eventually some of the work that I was doing there got picked up. Essentially we had some of the activist groups I was involved in were being surveilled by the US government. So that was maybe like a first taste. But
Mm.
I think that that was just a small taste and it didn't influence my work. I kind of saw it as separate. However, then when I moved to Germany, and I moved around the time of the Snowden leaks and so forth, I think I got a little bit more interested in what does it mean in a digital space. And then I think also the longer that I worked in machine learning, the more it was obvious to me the questions that we were being asked to produce and the impact that they would have when we feed personal data into models was significant. And I started then, of course, also in NLP. We work with a lot of sensitive data sources. And I started to question, is this really the intention of A, how we want to use machine learning? I think machine learning is pretty cool. I want to use machine learning, but is this the right way to do it? And B, what is the impact that we're having? Like, are we solving the right problems with machine learning? How can we focus on solving the right problems? And I kind of went through a journey through kind of ethics in machine learning to thinking about how do I have a real impact? And for me, that ended up in privacy, where I said, in my opinion, based on the work that I've done in ethics and machine learning, giving users choice, giving communicating with users how their data is being used, and giving machine learning people the ability to use data more responsibly with regards to privacy. This was for me something that I saw as a clear way to have direct impact on machine learning that we do today.
Oh, yeah, I've, that's very relevant experience, and I could definitely understand that you felt the need to get deeper into this topic. So, if you can kind of like I don't know if you can give a short answer to this, but but how would you say data privacy is important in society in general? I mean,
Yeah, I think like I think that you probably know my opinions from the book quite
mhm.
well, and
Yes, yes.
obviously the book is like a good resource for hearing some of my thoughts. But I mean, essentially, privacy, when we think about it, it's a few different concepts. In one, there's social and cultural understandings, there's legal understandings, or even political understandings of privacy, and then there's technical understandings of privacy. And I think when we think through social privacy or individual privacy, so how do I interact with the world? How do I present myself? How do I share information depending on my audience? All of these allow me to have some element of power and control over who I am. And I think when we think in a digital space, some of that translation of what we've built as humans through most likely thousands of years of evolution and deciding how do we interact with each other and how do we meet new people and how do we socialize ourselves, that because of moving to the internet and digitalization overall, it's much less apparent how we present ourselves and what information we show and what control we have over it. And so I think some of the work of putting data privacy into technology is making it more clear to users how they're interacting, allowing them to navigate in ways where they would navigate in the real world, where they can decide how they present themselves, where they can decide how other people might perceive them. And I think giving people more of this control and more of this understanding too, really, because they also need to build competence around what what is my data being used for? What data represents me? And how it is that many small data pieces can build a quite unique picture of who you are. Some of this maybe should be more, at least more transparent and readily communicable, and be then more controlled by the user. And I think honestly that wouldn't hurt our work as technologists for the most part. I think actually it provides better user experience. And at the end of the day, I think if we were providing a better user experience, from your work, we have good we have good outcomes, right? And so I think the current view of like, let's take as much personal data as possible because then we're going to provide a better experience is maybe not actually true,
No.
because people are annoyed sometimes when we do that and we don't talk with them about it.
Yeah, that's very true. That's a lot of truth in not many sentences. If I also read your book. Now you mentioned my book. I have your book right here, and you can definitely sense, yes, already authors. In your book, I can definitely sense what you have mentioned so far. This activist background. It's a very for an O'Reilly book. Your book struck me as a very political book. No, I mean that as a compliment.
Yeah.
I mean it as a compliment. I mean it's so rare to see tech books have bold takes, bold opinions in them. And I can definitely see that you are both an activist and someone that agitates for societal change. And then you also have this enterprise angle on privacy. And I think that balance is really interesting. So trying to dive deeper into the enterprise side of things, how do you think, why is data privacy important for companies? What can they learn from thinking more about data privacy?
Yeah, well, obviously, so I've been in Europe for the past nearly 10 years of my career. I live in Germany. Obviously, data privacy here is taken extremely seriously, and I enjoy that. I really like that. That's part of why I live here. But I think what happens is that data privacy becomes a blocker actually for new data initiatives. And what I see by the likes of the larger tech companies, particularly the FANGs and so forth, is they've learned how to leverage data privacy in a way that allows them to still make new offerings, still work with sensitive data, still have new insights, perform machine learning, the variety of person related data. And what I see in Germany, at least, and you'll have to let me know what you think it is in Denmark, but also across Europe, obviously, because we have a stronger regulatory environment, it also means that there's more sensitivity to these topics. And I think that one thing that we can learn is we don't have to be afraid of using sensitive data if we knowingly actually go about doing that. And I think what often happens is either in Europe, you work at a company that decides we don't care about data privacy, which is obviously also not a great point of view for your users. There's reputational risks, there's brand risks, there's also the fact that users might just go use a different service. But B, or B, that we don't use any person related data, which obviously, if you're trying to provide services for humans, not using human input is a good way to fail. And so, I think like we have to find this compromise, and there is a tension. And I think that my book talks a lot about this tension and trying to figure out how to navigate it.
Yeah.
And one of it is like human oriented design, talking with your users. I mean, that's a pretty good way to get input. And another of it is the technology and deciding like, okay, cool, we have tools. There are emerging technologies in privacy field that allow us to do these things more responsibly, and it doesn't have to be an on-off thing. It can be a range.
Yeah, so that is definitely what it can be. As I learned in your book, I mean, I've been thinking about it as let me just admit it, as a complete amateur. I'm not a data privacy expert in any way, but I've always been struck by this, like in so many enterprise applications, you see this turn privacy on off
Yeah.
tab, and it's like, okay, I'm turning privacy on now. Now it's privacy, and it's always struck me like, but as an amateur, like that can't be true. I mean, it's not something that you can turn on and off, right? So when I read your book, it had this wonderful figure. It's for the readers that are interested. It's figure 2.1 that I'm referring to. That describes the continuum of anonymity. Can you unfold for the listeners what that continuum is?
Yeah, so a lot of times in the privacy field, we call it the privacy utility, or we can talk about like information versus entropy. So like there's this tension essentially between um, full information with no protections, and we could call that also full utility of the data. And that means we take all data, presuming that we've collected it appropriately and there's not errors in the data that we've collected, which of course is a huge assumption.
Yeah.
And that from your work, that is properly labeled, that we know where it comes from, that we understand how it fits into our scheme. Also another huge assumption, right? So, but we essentially have this idea: 100% information is 0% privacy, right? Particularly if we're talking about personal data. And then on the other end, we have complete privacy, which means no information. So, from information theory perspective, if you've ever studied information theory, you can kind of start to reason about these ends. And full privacy would be zero data, right? So, so we obviously, if we work in data, we want like maybe to be somewhere between those points,
Yeah.
and closer to the utility side. And that graphic, or what that figure shows, and it's not meant to be linear. I think it's probably a non-linear space more. But the idea is that there's different technologies you can choose. There's different methods you can choose. Simple ones like pseudonymization, like tokenization, like removal of personal data. Those are some methods, but we have encryption methods. We have things like differential privacy. We have a variety of technologies that allow for us to think through where on this spectrum can we land? And figuring that out is really probably a data scientist's job, but maybe also a general data conversation or a conversation at your company where you can start thinking of how much information do we actually need to solve the problem at hand? And is there ways that we can provide more privacy for users, but still get the information that we need? And I think that that's honestly, it's a pretty cool math and statistics problem. So if you're in data because you like that stuff, I very much would welcome you into privacy. But it's also a kind of cool product thinking exercise, because you're also keeping always users in focus and thinking through, are people really comfortable sharing this information? Is there another way that we could give them a choice of getting the utility of what we're providing them, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to provide user value, but somehow sharing the data less clearly or with less information. We can do that with a variety of methods.
Yeah, so that was exactly what I got out of your figure, right? That this kind of unfolds this entire discipline that privacy is. It's not an either or, it's something in between, and it's that judgment also executed via mathematics that really is privacy. And you talk about this as privacy engineering. Can you unfold also for the listeners what privacy engineering is all about? I was honestly, it was the first time I heard that term, but I think it will emerge and become more popular.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an evolving field. So I've definitely interacted with some people that think like, okay, privacy engineering is A, and that's the only thing it is. And I think that there's been a community of practice around privacy engineering for some time now. And I don't want to discount all of the amazing work that has been done on privacy engineering. And some of that is exactly kind of probably the interfaces you've seen, where it's like, can we turn privacy on? Can we apply privacy to specifically documented areas of our data? Like, I really liked your CISO DPO conversation in your book, because I think that that's like, so like for folks who haven't read the book, it's this idea of like, what is confidential data? What is person-related data? Like, how do these play with each other, and how do we put appropriate, complement these ideas in interfaces and in ability for people to discover data? Because what we don't want to do is turn the data completely off. And I think so. The field of privacy engineering kind of has emerged over now decades to do that. I kind of come in the newer group of privacy engineering, which is people that are actively already working in data science and machine learning, and who are bringing cool privacy technologies, which a lot of times people will refer to as privacy enhancing technologies or privacy preserving techniques. So those are common names in the field. And we're kind of like the new guard of privacy engineering. And there is a bit of tension, I must admit, but I think the field of privacy engineering itself is growing and is encompassing more of the conversations between maybe folks that have more a policy oriented, procedure oriented view of how do we implement privacy in engineering, and those of us that are kind of working on more the newer research led science that is evolving some of the ways that we can engineer privacy into applications. And I'm actually currently interviewing a series of people who don't have privacy engineer in their title, but who are doing privacy engineering work.
Yeah.
And my first video is already out. If people want to check it out, the name is Probably Private on YouTube. And I have a new video coming out next week focusing on cryptography. So that's a fun, yeah. So it's fun, and I wish I could give you an answer for privacy engineering, but I think overall it's the idea of how do we support in the field of both software and in data, how do we support privacy being designed into systems?
Yeah, cool. Thank you. And I remember when I posted a big review on your book on LinkedIn, and there was some guy saying, but that is not privacy engineering. Privacy engineering is exactly this. And I kind of felt like, I don't know if I answered or not, but it's like, the whole point is there is no single definition of this yet. So if you want to comment and be so bold about what you think, maybe read the book.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's
but I also think,
you, right?
there's also been people working on the field. Like there's a privacy engineer handbook. There's like been folks working in the field for now decades. So I think it's more just around, having those conversations of different disciplines within privacy engineering, which I'm sure you've encountered in your work in data documentation, cataloging, and design and discovery and so forth. Yes.
Oh yes. People telling me how things should be, that because they have done so for decades. But yeah, sometimes they're also right. I mean, you shouldn't discard history altogether, right? Okay, so I have a couple of questions left. I think, first of all, what would be your best advice if you want to get started in a career with privacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the cool thing is there's so many different aspects of privacy because it is such a multidisciplinary field in and of itself. I'm gonna make an assumption that a lot of folks that are listening to your podcast, your media, and so forth, that they come from data more of the engineering and science background. And if so, then I would encourage you maybe to read the book if you're interested. That might give you a little tidbit or taste of different aspects. But B, to start to decide, okay, if you want to move to privacy, what are the skill sets that you have now that you'd like to leverage in the field of shifting to privacy? So if you're a data engineer, or if you're already working in data governance, then you automatically have a way that you can immediately take things like privacy and build them into your workflows. There's a few examples in the book around appropriately tagging and filtering sensitive data, working on lineage. This is extremely important in privacy and extremely important in data, and yet is often something that we overlook, unfortunately. Working and thinking through access requests. So how do we grant people access, and are there ways for us to grant access to data that is better protected while people still get their job done? And if you're more in the science and data science and machine learning side, you might be interested then to look at kind of the more ways that we build this into machine learning systems, that we build this into data science tasks, and then you might be more drawn to ideas like differential privacy or federated machine learning or even encrypted machine learning.
Oh.
And those are also some cool other parts of the book. And if you ever if people are interested and want to reach out, I'm happy to help give some advice on career paths and so forth. But I think there's also a burgeoning community within privacy engineering, and privacy people are super nice and welcoming. It's been like a real nice thing compared to maybe some of the machine learning community when I first joined. I was like very intimidated. Privacy people, I think like it's a human oriented discipline, so tends to be like also very friendly group of folks.
You can kind of imagine that by the naming of it, right? Machine learning versus data privacy.
Yeah, exactly.
What kind of people would? I mean, I wouldn't.
I mean, I think machine learning depends where you're
Yeah,
at. But when
of
I
course,
first got involved, I felt a bit intimidated. But yeah, I think there's good folks overall
of
doing
course, of
and
course.
good folks doing both, right? So obviously.
Okay, this is the Data Democracy podcast,
Hmm.
KJ. So I have a question for you around that. We talk a lot about data getting democratized in companies. More and more people can do more and more stuff with data. I try to think about the end state of all that, what a data democracy is. And so my question here is, what role should data privacy play when more and more data is becoming democratized?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, if I were to share my thoughts, I think it's a matter of allowing better user control over the way that their data is being democratized, right? And
Mm.
so I talk a little bit about concepts of data trust, of data collectives, and so forth in the book. In my personal opinion of data democracy, it functions where as democratic participants, as community members, as humans, as communities, right? As real, like we're social creatures. That's how we interact. That the way that our data is used and the possibility to use our data becomes more in our own hands and less controlled by, let's say, like a few large institutions, like the larger tech companies. And I think that has also a lot of meaning here for smaller enterprises, in my opinion, or even mid-sized to large enterprises who are not in the big tech community. Is that something that you can offer your users that they don't get other places, which is the ability to agree, the ability to consent, the ability to interact with their own data, the ability to export and play with their data, and making data like a real living thing for the humans involved, I think would also significantly change the types of things that we build. I think sometimes users have brilliant ideas on how to use their own data, and if given the chance, could and would provide really amazing insights into how data can be used honestly to better their own
Mm.
lives and maybe the lives of community and the world.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, KJ. That that allowing, like in the course of data democratization, allowing users to control how their data is being used actually enhances our collective knowledge of what that data can be used for and what it means, how it is expressed. I think ah that was a small epiphany for me. Thank you.
Of course.
Um, so it's two questions, and maybe we can turn it into one. But so it'll be a little long, but I would be really curious to know what your take. I'm sure you have heard about or read about Tim Berners-Lee's second vision for the World Wide Web in the course of, or in the after the rise of social media and so forth. He wanted to create this kind of building block web where everyone controlled their own data. I would be super curious to hear what you think about that, and that really taps into the overall question of how do you imagine the future of data privacy?
Yeah, I mean, Tim Berners-Lee and the work that he's also been doing advising Solid and so forth is quite interesting. It's this idea that we put data in the hands of users and at the same time in the hands of companies that the users would like to interact with, and we give users the ability to reason about and control kind of what data they share, to whom and under what circumstances. I would almost take that and go further and say, what if we could also, as data users, connect our data with other people without going through an intermediary? I think this has been strongly influenced by my work in what I call distributed machine learning, but what we in industry call either federated learning, and the field that I worked in, encrypted machine learning, where I was able to see, okay, we can perform fully distributed machine learning. We can protect the data sets that we use. And for me, as also somebody that's worked in social sciences and so forth, I started to wonder, is this not the way we should be solving like a bunch of problems that we have? Like the energy crisis that we've been having within Germany, at least, numerous, like the climate change, climate catastrophe, and so forth. Is there not ways that if we were to empower kind of the data that we can get on the ground, and instead of pulling it and centralizing it and running global models, which by the way are not often very accurate or useful on an individual or on a community or local level, is there not a way for us to, on local levels, on community levels, or even across distributed points, geographies that have similar problems, is there not a way for us to better connect data to solve a specific problem and to also then, if needed, build privacy in so that, if I want to study, let's say, particular energy consumption patterns in this part of the world versus another part of the world that's quite similar, that we do so without necessarily leaking that you sit at home watching Netflix all weekend or something like this, right? We want to like make sure that, we build the types of privacy we need, and you'd be surprised the amount of information that could leak from just sharing a little bit of data. But how can we empower people to share the data in new ways and form new problems? And I gave a keynote on this last week at PyData Amsterdam, and I think numerous people came up to me afterwards on how do we do community-driven machine learning, where we're solving like most relevant problems right now. And I've been doing some work over the past year in public sector within Europe and within Germany, and it's amazing to me how small of a change you need to have a huge impact in things like public sector and things like transportation and things like critical infrastructure. And I think it'd be really cool to have people want to share data to have direct impact in their own life and the lives of others by maybe focusing some of their energy and time on sharing data in this way.
Wow. Thank you, KJ. And it was really a privilege to have you on. Thank you for taking the time. And for the listeners out there, please take a look at Practical Data Privacy if you want to know more.
They work better together.
Thank you, KJ. Thank you.
Of course.